The puppy was clumsy, probably about 8 weeks old. His coat was brindle, mostly boxer, but it was clear that other breeds were mixed in as well. When he noticed the woman looking at him through the bars, he turned on his puppy charm, wagging his tail and moving to the front of the cage. The woman reached her hand into the cage, and the pup licked it, hoping this would be his ticket to a forever home. The look in the woman's eyes told the puppy he was on the right track. He wagged his tail even harder and kept licking her hand. The woman's eyes widened, and tears welled up in their corners. She turned to the man kneeling behind her. "Yes, this one," she said. "And you're going to feed him, walk him, and take care of him?" the man asked, his voice so full of disbelief that the puppy almost understood it. "Well, yes, he'll be my little buddy. He'll follow me everywhere, protect me, and all that," she said. He rolled his eyes, making no attempt to hide his pessimism. She had made similar promises before, and almost every time, the responsibility for whatever she wanted ended up falling on him: the garden, cooking, mentoring a 6th-grade girl from Nigeria, and much more. The last thing he wanted was to take care of a dog, but what could he say? For those you love, you do everything. "Fine, we'll take this big-eyed one staring at her from the cage," said Bryce England to the shelter worker. "Wrap him up and put a bow on him." "You won't be able to take him home today. He needs to be neutered first," the shelter worker replied. "We can do it tomorrow, and if everything goes well, you can pick him up the day after." "Hank," Vera England said, cutting off the puzzled look her husband shot her. "We'll bring Hank home the day after tomorrow." "Right," the man smiled, rising from his knees behind her husband and glancing down at her blouse. Bryce noticed the man's attempt to peek down her blouse and smirked to himself. It was hardly the first time some sleazeball had tried to sneak a look at his busty wife. She probably didn't even notice anymore. It had become so routine. Just another occupational hazard, so to speak. The puppy grew into a fairly large dog. For the first 3 weeks, Vera took care of him, but gradually, she shifted her responsibilities onto Bryce. As Bryce assumed the role of caretaker, the dog's loyalty naturally shifted to him. The dog still liked Vera, but dogs are simpler creatures than humans. Their strongest attachment is to the one who feeds and cares for them. "You see, you should take care of him, since he likes you more," she said one day when Bryce reminded her of her promise to look after the dog. "He likes me more because I take care of him," Bryce snorted. "Dogs are simple creatures, unlike you women." Vera knew exactly where this was heading. She fluttered her eyelashes, gazing at her husband of 10 years, and thrust out her impressive chest in a tight pink top. Bryce practically started drooling. Men are so simple, she thought to herself. Vera knew that she was the most complicated part of their relationship. She also knew that things wouldn't get any less complicated in the near future, and she understood that her husband didn't deserve the pain that lay ahead. Vera and Bryce had recently celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary. Bryce believed he had the perfect wife and the perfect marriage. Sure, they had the occasional argument, but never about anything serious. For example, he was a fan of the Cubs, while Vera loved the White Sox. "That's probably the biggest thing we argue about," he thought, but he was wrong. Vera was an assistant to the vice president at an international insurance company. She had been working there for 9 years, with the last 6 under her direct supervisor, Anand Patel. They had developed a strong professional rapport and had become good friends. Vera and Bryce even spent time socially with Anand and his wife outside of the office. Bryce liked the man. For 3 years, Vera and Anand were nothing more than colleagues and friends. She found her boss pleasant, charming, and handsome. At 45, he was in good physical shape, with salt and pepper black hair and large brown eyes. His Indian heritage gave him a warm, light brown complexion, and his education in the UK lent him a refined upper-class British accent. His baritone voice added a smooth, almost lawyer-like quality to his speech. Vera had never considered being unfaithful to Bryce. She thought her husband was no less handsome than her boss, with his light chestnut hair and large, expressive blue eyes. He spent several evenings a week at the gym and had the physique to show for it. He fit the profile of a certified accountant perfectly, quiet and thoughtful. He wasn't particularly social, but Vera knew his love for her was boundless. She also knew he was quite skilled in bed. Vera and Anand occasionally went out for lunch and discussed work matters. Over time, these conversations shifted to personal topics. It wasn't until a few years later that their lunches became purely personal and it quickly became the norm. Anna knew that women found him desirable, but he wasn't a habitual womanizer. Prior to this, he had been unfaithful in his marriage only twice. Neither he nor Vera had any plans for their friendship to develop further, until it did. About 6 months after their personal lunches began, the pair found themselves in bed at a hotel during a long lunch break. Vera was surprised that she didn't feel guilty after her first encounter with Annan. That first time, they made love twice, and both of them experienced immense pleasure. They didn't do anything she hadn't done before with Bryce, but the fact that it was her first time in over a decade being intimate with someone other than her husband made it feel extraordinarily different. Her body was both curvaceous and toned, with her ample chest undoubtedly being a thing of beauty. The couple waited a week before arranging their second meeting. In both their opinions, it was no less enjoyable than the first. If anything, it was even better, as they explored each other and discovered what pleased them both. Their encounters became a weekly affair, often shifting days to ensure Bryce couldn't notice any patterns. Vera utilized her excellent organizational skills to keep everything seamless. Though she was always concerned her husband might find out, after a few weeks, she began to find it amusing how effortlessly she had managed to conceal her affair. She felt superior to him and, to be honest, smarter than her unsuspecting husband. Vera was under no illusions that this was a love affair. However, she felt it didn't take even an ounce of love away from her husband. Instead, she felt invigorated, both in her marriage and in her life. She had her husband's love, and she also had her relationship with her lover. While she didn't love Annan in the way she loved Bryce, she knew her feelings for him were much more than mere passion. Vera made sure to remain fully present with Bryce, giving him every ounce of love and desire she believed he wanted or needed. She felt closer to her husband than ever before and was confident she would know immediately if he started to suspect anything. At the same time, she still felt some tension that compelled her to keep her two lives separate. Since she worked near her husband, Vera and her lover didn't have much time to do anything other than enjoy incredible sex when they were together. Both of them knew they had other shared interests and wanted to explore them further, but she was aware that Annan wanted to spend more time with her, but she understood that it wouldn't happen unless her husband left town, which rarely occurred. She decided it was a wonderful problem to have two attractive men who loved her. When Bryce found out about it a few months later, he was considerably less optimistic about the situation. One evening, while he was alone because Vera had to work late, Bryce picked up his wife's tablet from the side table near his chair instead of going to the home office to grab his laptop. When he logged in to order some books, two delivery addresses appeared in the ship to field. The first was the England's home address, but the second belonged to Anand Patel, Vera's boss, and it wasn't his usual home address. Bryce's eyes widened significantly as he stared at the second address. His immediate reaction was a sick feeling in the pit of his stomach, but that quickly morphed into rage. He let out a shout, his voice echoing off all four walls around him. Then, he walked over to his liquor cabinet, poured himself a double shot of single malt whiskey, and began to make plans. Bryce's biggest problem was that just a few minutes earlier, he would have told anyone and everyone that he loved his wife madly, and that feeling hadn't disappeared, despite her apparent infidelity. If further investigation confirmed she was indeed cheating, he would have to confront his emotions and figure out whether they could continue as a married couple. About an hour later, Vera came home, humming as she walked through the door. For the first time that Bryce could remember, he didn't jump up from his seat and rush to greet her with a welcoming kiss. Vera noticed this immediately. "Hi, sweetheart, is everything okay?" she asked, walking over to Bryce, who was sitting in his lazy boy chair, reading the sports section of the newspaper. "Not even close," Bryce muttered, turning his head so that Vera's kiss, meant for his lips, landed on his cheek. Vera stepped back and looked at her husband closely. For the first time, it crossed her mind that he might somehow have found out about her affair. Bryce caught the look out of the corner of his eye and realized he needed to remain calm until he could formulate a plan. Acting without preparation wasn't in his nature. Suddenly feeling uncertain, Vera decided that discretion was the better part of valor and chose not to press the issue. She made a mental note to pay more attention to her husband's mood. Perhaps she had been taking him for granted. The next day at work, Bryce called a good friend of his, a former attorney. After Bryce explained his predicament, his friend contacted his top investigator and brought him onto the case. 2 weeks later, Bryce had confirmation of his wife's infidelity, complete with photos and videos. "And now what, amigo?" his friend asked. For the first time since his parents died in a car accident 5 years ago, Bryce openly cried. Vera tried to stay inconspicuous, but over the next few days, after he hadn't greeted her that evening, she carefully observed her husband. She knew there wasn't an ounce of deceit in Bryce and felt confident that she would quickly notice if he suspected her of having an affair. Vera even caught herself mentally calling it an affair. She knew it was wrong, yet she couldn't convince herself it was bad, especially since she felt she wasn't neglecting Bryce in any way. After a few days of watching him, the only change Vera could notice was in the bedroom. Normally, Bryce initiated sex just as often as she did, but over the next week, he made no attempts at intimacy. When she took the initiative a couple of days later, he seemed reluctant at first, but then displayed a physical intensity he had never shown before, and every time since, whenever she was the one to initiate. Bryce's newfound physical intensity in the bedroom became his only outlet for the growing resentment he felt toward his wife's infidelity. He stopped initiating sex with Vera, but when she did, he made sure to take what he wanted forcefully. He was surprised that she didn't pick up on his anger. In fact, she seemed to enjoy this new version of Bryce. "Come on, big guy, make me stronger," she teased during one of their encounters. Her cries of pleasure built to a crescendo, and moments later, she let out a sharp gasp as waves of euphoria overtook her. She collapsed onto the bed, completely relaxed, with not a single worry crossing her mind. Bryce gently shifted her position, lifting her legs and resting her ankles on his shoulders as he continued with determined intensity. Vera's breath quickened, and her voice trembled with every movement. She clung to him, lost in the moment, as another wave of joy swept through her, pulling Bryce along with her. With a deep groan, he embraced her tightly, their connection leaving them both breathless. Afterward, Vera drifted into a peaceful sleep, her final thought a soft realization. She was the happiest woman in the world, blessed with the devotion of the man she loved. Bryce instructed his attorney to draft divorce papers on the grounds of adultery, even though, in a no-fault state, this had no financial implications. The divorce would be fairly straightforward since he and his wife earned similar incomes and didn't yet have children. They would have to sell their house and split the profits equally. "I know this sounds crazy, but just hold on to the papers until I tell you," Bryce explained. "I want to let this play out a little longer, and maybe she'll come to her senses. I love that foolish woman, and maybe with some counseling." "Are you at least going to demand an explanation?" asked John Jefferson, his attorney. "That would probably bring things to a quicker conclusion." "Probably not. You know how stubborn Vera can be. If I confront her, she'll just dig in her heels even more. It has to come from her, and then maybe we'll have a chance." "You're the boss. Just let me know when. The papers will stay safe as long as Twinkies last," Bryce's attorney replied. A year later, Bryce was completely baffled by how his supposedly smart wife failed to notice the growing cracks in their relationship. The small touches and shared glances between them had disappeared. Their intimacy had dwindled to just once a week, and when they were intimate, it felt like nothing more than routine sex. Although Vera might not have realized it, Bryce knew they hadn't truly made love since he discovered her affair. He was also amazed at how Vera managed to keep up the pretense of being a faithful wife. She seemed to juggle her career, maintain her affair, and keep up with all her hobbies and social engagements effortlessly. When he thought about it, he had to admit it was quite impressive. Since Bryce didn't seem inclined to pull the trigger on a divorce, things might have continued for much longer. However, fate intervened in the form of a promotion for Annan. He was promoted to a director position at the company's London office and was set to leave in a month. Vera was devastated by the development, though professionally, she was happy for her lover. "Maybe this is the God's way of telling us it's time to end our relationship," Annan said. "We've been doing this for 3 years and never got caught. I'd say we've been very discreet, and maybe we've also been a little lucky." Over the next 2 weeks, both Vera and Annan shed tears several times. Bryce noticed that Vera seemed distracted at times. He wondered whether the issue was work-related or tied to her relationship with Annan. "Is something going on, baby?" he asked. Vera looked as though she wanted to say something but held back and left the room. Bryce internally guessed that trouble had arisen in paradise between the lovers and smiled to himself. Liza Patel was thrilled not only about her husband's promotion, but also about their new destination. She had grown up in London, where much of her family still lived. She took charge of packing their belongings so that she, their 2 children, and herself could move to London a week before Annan was scheduled to leave. This arrangement left the lovers with one final week together before Annan's flight to London from New York. To Vera, the plan seemed sensible, but Annan wasn't fully convinced. She was to fly to New York on Friday and spend the entire weekend with him before his Monday morning departure for London. The plan included dining at fine restaurants, attending a Broadway show, and visiting some landmarks before saying their final goodbyes. The only flaw in this plan was that Vera intended to tell her husband she would be spending her last weekend with Annan. "Why tell him, Vera?" Annan asked. "Just say it's a business trip. He'll never know." "How many business trips have I had in all my years here? None. And suddenly, I have to go away for the weekend. Bryce may be trusting, but that would feel far-fetched. If I lie and he catches me, it's over between us. But if I tell him the truth and appeal to his love for me, I honestly think we can get through it. It might hurt him a bit, but he loves me unconditionally, and he's the most logical guy I know. Logically, it makes more sense to tell him," she explained. "Well, if you think that's the right thing to do, you know him better than anyone," Annan replied. Vera waited until the evening before her trip to New York to tell her husband everything. After dinner, once the table was cleared, she snuggled up to Bryce on the couch. As had been the norm for the past 2 years or more, Bryce didn't lean into her, but he also didn't pull away. He seemed engrossed in the TV show he was watching. Vera waited a few minutes, then cleared her throat. "I need to go away this weekend, Bryce," Vera began. She sat quietly, waiting for her husband to acknowledge her words. He looked at her silently, his expression unreadable. She explained her plan for the weekend, starting with Annan's promotion, but she never confessed to the ongoing affair. "So he's leaving for good, and after this weekend, we won't see each other again. We have feelings for each other, and we just need to have this final connection. We've had these feelings for years, and this seems like the perfect way to bring it all to an end," Vera said. "After this, he'll be in London and I'll be here, spending the rest of my life making it up to you. We won't text. We won't talk on the phone. Nothing. It will be completely over." Bryce hadn't expected such a declaration. He barely managed to hold his tongue, especially when she blatantly lied by claiming that nothing sexual had ever happened between them. "I've been a good wife to you. You never knew anything about our relationship, and I've never kept anything else from you," Vera said. Bryce tried to respond, but no words came out. He lowered his head and forced himself to count to 10. He thought about how much he should reveal. "You can't do this, Vera," Bryce finally said. "I don't care what you're telling yourself. We made vows, and you don't get to rewrite the rules for a weekend fling with another man. Does Lisa know about this? If she does, I can't imagine she's any happier about it than I am. Does she even know at all?" Vera flushed deeply, her face turning red. "I don't know if Annan told Lisa. She's already in London. Listen, Bryce, I'm not asking for your permission to do this. I'm going to do it regardless of your answer. We can talk about it more when I get back," she said. "I guess that's why you waited until the last minute to tell me. You're not looking for permission, just forgiveness," Bryce replied. "Sweetheart, you know you always give in to me when we argue. Sooner or later, you'll realize this won't hurt us, and you'll let me do it, or you'll forgive me later," she said. "Not this time. This is the straw that breaks the camel's back," Bryce said. "You get on that plane, and we're done." Bryce's final words hit Vera like a slap in the face with a spiked glove. If she heard his warning about this being the last straw, she didn't seem to take it seriously. Bryce considered sleeping in the guest room, but decided he wouldn't let his wife push him out of his own bed. By the time Vera came upstairs and climbed into bed, he was already asleep. Bryce got up about an hour earlier than usual. Before leaving, he noticed a small packed suitcase of Vera's sitting on the bed in the guest room. However, when he returned home shortly after 5 p.m., it was no longer there. That evening, he called his attorney and said just one word, "Go." The taxi to the airport pulled up in front of the hotel just after 3 p.m. Annan carried Vera's suitcase to the car and placed it on the back seat. The pair, with tears in their eyes, shared a farewell kiss, only to be interrupted by a gruff man tapping Vera on the shoulder. They tried to ignore the intruder, but the man was not to be deterred. "Vera England, are you Vera England?" he asked. The couple broke their embrace and both sighed in frustration. Yes, Vera snapped. Mrs. England, you've been served, the man said, placing a manila envelope in her hand. The embrace was immediately forgotten. Tears began streaming down Vera's face as she passed the envelope to Annan, who angrily tore it open. "Damn it," Annan shouted. "I thought you said he was a reasonable, thoughtful guy or something like that. You said this wouldn't be a problem. He must have acted incredibly fast to serve you so quickly." Vera was crying too hard to think rationally. It was going to be a long flight home. She wasn't surprised when Bryce didn't meet her at the airport. She took an Uber home. Bryce was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. A second cup sat in Vera's spot. She understood the gesture and sat down, her tears already starting to fall. "Please, Vera, stop with the Dan waterworks. I should be the one crying. I'm the one who was cheated on," Bryce said. Vera's head shot up at his words. Her tears stopped instantly, but her blood pressure soared. "It wasn't cheating. I told you exactly what I was going to do," she said. "Did I agree to your plan? No. So yes, you cheated. You don't get to make the rules, or in this case, break them," Bryce said. "It was just one weekend out of our entire married life," she replied. 2.5 days out of thousands so far, with thousands more ahead. "Do you really want to divorce me over this?" "Actually, no. I think I could have gotten past it, if that's all it was," Bryce said, staring directly into her eyes. For the first time, Bryce saw his wife break. She simply started calculating in her head. "How stupid do you think I am? This wasn't your first time. Sure, it was your first weekend together, but you two have been sleeping together for more than 2 years, as far as I can tell," he said. "I have to give you credit. For at least 2 years, you've been living a double life, an ideal wife and an unfaithful adulteress. I held on, hoping you'd come to your senses and give him up, but with your weekend out of time, you crossed the line." Vera felt dizzy, even though she was sitting down. She took a sip of coffee, trying to gather her thoughts. "Why didn't you say anything before? Why didn't you try to stop me?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "By the time I found out, it had already been going on for quite a while. I hoped you'd stop on your own, because it was wrong, and because you loved me. What a fool I was," he said. "But I love you," she declared. "I haven't loved you any less, but I'd love him too. I'm capable of loving both of you, but you're my husband. You've always been number one." "No, no, no. There is no number one because there shouldn't be a number 2, or 3, or 4, Bryce replied. "It's just you and Annan. Well, now just you. He's gone, and it's just you and me," Vera said. "Well, now it's just you. I'm not part of this equation anymore, sweetheart." "Oh, come on, Bryce, he's gone. There's no reason to get a divorce," Vera said. "If he hadn't left, would you have stopped sleeping with him?" Bryce asked. Vera lowered her eyes. She didn't need to answer. "Why did you think it was okay to sleep with him? How did it even start?" he asked. "You know Annan and you liked him," she began, but Bryce interrupted her. "Liked," he corrected. "All right, I get it. But he's a great guy, and after you, I think he's the most attractive man I've ever known. And it just happened. It happened, and it happened, and it happened," Bryce scoffed as his wife shot him a displeased look. "We developed real feelings for each other. It wasn't just cheap sex. You know I could never have cheap sex with someone. I love you both," Vera said. "That's not how it works, sweetheart. You can't love two people," Bryce retorted. "Have I ever taken anything away from you? Have I ever denied you sex?" she asked. "Yes, you gave in what you swore would be mine alone. We both took vows, Vera. This is so much more than sex. It's about trust, respect. And now that Annan is gone, I fully expect you'll replace him with someone else, because clearly, you don't respect me enough to stop something like this from happening," Bryce said. "I don't see the possibility of finding a third man in my life to love. Most people are lucky to find just one great love, and I've found 2. I've already exceeded my lifetime quota," Vera said. "You still don't get it, do you? The one thing I haven't heard from you is an apology," Bryce said. "I'm sorry for hurting you. I never wanted to do that. But I just couldn't tell you because you knew it was wrong," Bryce interrupted. "You don't regret the affair, do you?" "Honestly, no," Vera admitted. "I love Annan. I enjoyed our time together. As I've said, I had 2 men whom I loved, and who loved me in return. I wouldn't trade that for anything. Bryce shook his head in disbelief. He had expected remorse and guilt. To his shock, he got neither. And what about Liza? He asked. She didn't know about this affair, did she? Oh no, please don't tell me you told her everything, Vera said, her voice rising with panic. She deserved to know. We were her friends, just as we were his. Friends don't keep secrets like that. And why shouldn't she know if this was such a pure love story, a romance for the ages? Vera clenched her fists in frustration, staring at her husband. You're making it sound cheap and tawdry. It wasn't like that, she hissed. Liza would probably disagree with you, just like I do, Bryce replied. They have 2 kids, Bryce. You're going to blow up their family, she said. Only if Liza sees it the way I do. If she sees it from your perspective, then I think you're both safe. But if she agrees with me, it still won't mean that I'm the one who blew up their family. I wasn't the one sleeping with her husband, Bryce said. The next day, Vera received a phone call from Annan while she was at work. Liza, apparently, hadn't yet filed for divorce, but when Annan arrived at their new home in London, his wife wouldn't even let him through the door. I can't believe your husband did this to me, Annan shouted into the phone. I thought we were friends. Yes, but I think he figured that a friend shouldn't be sleeping with his wife for the past 3 years, Vera replied. I tried to explain it to him, but he doesn't believe me. He's being so rigid about everything. He's never been like this before. He's always given in to me on everything. I think this is a bit bigger than the color of the living room walls, Annan said gloomily. A week passed before Bryce received a call from Vera's parents. He had always had a good relationship with her family, a bond that had grown even stronger after his own parents died in a car accident. Have you thought about counseling, son? Her father asked. You 2 have been together for 10 years. Weren't you planning to have children soon? Yes, but now I don't think that's ever going to happen, Bryce replied. Oh, no, son. Don't let something small turn into something fatal, her father said. Something small, Bryce repeated. He quickly realized that Vera hadn't been honest with her parents about the situation and understood the rest of the conversation was going to be difficult. Our disagreement is about her long-term affair with her former boss. Did you know they've been sleeping together for over 2 years? On the other end of the phone, Ralph Carville gasped. It's a shock to any father to hear someone say his little girl is an adulteress. Bryce then heard Ralph ask his wife if she knew anything about their daughter's infidelity. He caught her stammering but didn't hear a clear answer. Damn it, Faith, he's family. How could you do this to him? Bryce heard Ralph shouting at his wife. How long have you known? Damn it, woman. Incredibly stubborn, Ralph returned to the call. Sorry, Bryce, I didn't know, but apparently, my daughter and my wife were keeping secrets from both of us. I know I didn't raise her to be an adulteress. An affair lasting several years, and she thought you'd just go along with it. Damn, I raised an arrogant cheater. Once again, I'm sorry, Bryce. We all have regrets, Dad, good night. Bryce couldn't believe it, but Vera was still fighting against the divorce. Everything came to a head when Vera's attorney suggested marriage counseling, and the judge chuckled. Are you serious, Mr. Liston? It's perfectly clear to me that Mrs. England had a long-term sexual affair with her former boss, and I must assume that Mr. England didn't consent to it. Frankly, only an idiot would agree to counseling after everything he's been through, the judge remarked. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. The only point of contention in the proceedings was the dog, Hank. Bryce assumed Hank would stay with him, but Vera insisted the dog should remain with her since Bryce had given the dog to her. In the end, Bryce relented, but as he was leaving the house, Hank jumped onto the front passenger seat of Bryce's car. Vera called for the dog repeatedly and eventually had to forcibly pull the large dog out, only to watch it jump right back in. Keep the damn dog, you bastard, Vera shouted. Bryce noted to himself that it was the first time he had ever heard his ex-wife curse. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.